Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Inking Out Loud podcast. Today, for episode 19, we're finally, at long last, finishing up with our read of Caine's Law, which will wrap up our time in Matthew Woodring Stover's The Acts of Caine. As is customary with, our episodes in this universe, I'm mentioning once again that this episode going forward will not be censored. Because if we did, or rather if we paid Pat to, all of his free time would be gone, and this episode would probably end up somewhere around 15 minutes. So in the interest of, keeping this thing natural, providing our unadulterated impressions, I will absolutely, we have free reign to use any and all of the colorful language of Caine. Right, fuckers?
Yes.
And I'd also like to give a quick shout out to our first $10 patron supporter, Simon Jester. Simon, welcome, my friend.
Now, it's important to note that this isn't just some person who named their online handle Simon Jester. This is the real Simon Jester.
Yeah, in the flesh.
This is the Penal Colony Moon AI from Robert Heinlein's classic science fiction novel, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
Correct.
And apparently they really like our podcast. I feel blessed.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad that we have extraterrestrial supporters already.
Yeah.
We just got a message the other day with our first South American supporter, and now we have somebody from the moon.
No kidding. Awesome. We are, I was going to say international, but that is even more than that, I suppose.
And soon the world.
Anyway, so, joining me today, as always, with our Acts of Caine read-through, are my co-host, Drew McCaffrey.
How's it going?
And our master of all things sound, Pat McCaffrey.
I'm so sorry.
Gentlemen, I will start off by saying this. Apparently the novel was originally titled His Father's Fist, which I think was a much better name, both metaphorically and aesthetically. But after reading this one, I really want to propose an alternate name. Check this out, okay?
Oh.
The Acts of Caine, Book 4. It's complicated.
How about
Do you know
raining
how many
weird?
Fucking times we heard those words in this book? It's complicated. I mean, if I kind of wish I had this one on e-reader as well, because I would actually be able to do a search in book function and tell you how many fucking times we heard those words. And it had to be at least 20 times, I'm thinking. And judging by how I feel now after the fact, they were all deserved. I mean, this book was complicated as fuck. How did you find it?
Yeah, I was overwhelmed the first time I read this book. I've now read it 3 times, and I'm still a little overwhelmed. I think I have a pretty good grasp on the events of Caine's Law entirely, and I understand kind of thematically what he was going for. There's still some of the scene level events where I'm just like, man, I don't know where this fits in. Like, did this unhappen? Did this happen in a different timeline? Did it happen in between Caine Blackknife and Caine's Law? Like the opening scene of the book, I don't remember if I brought this up on the last episode, because it's been about a month since we recorded. There's been quite a lot that's happened. I went off to JordanCon for a week, and so we missed some time in there, and then just life in general got in the way with Easter weekend and everything.
As it does.
So it's been a while since the last episode, and I don't remember if I called this out, but that opening scene where you get like the broken and bleeding Caine climbing to the top of the spire to the Purificapex. Good lord, the words, all the Krillian words in this.
In the audiobook, I think it's Purificapex.
Purificapex? Okay.
Yeah, as in Purific Apex. Just, I guess, mashed together in one word.
Yeah. But like, I don't understand where that scene fits in. Because it's Caine like going up and grabbing the sword of man, Kosal, this both literal and metaphorical sword, and through that building a connection with the outside power, with the Diltalon, Pyroconth, whatever you want to call it, and then saying, I'm not gonna kill you, we're gonna make a deal. And it's like, okay. How, like, where does this fit in? Because there's like, that can't have happened in the timeline of Caine Blackknife, because we have an unbroken timeline of
Sorry, keep going. I just have a bit of a beer spill here. Drew, my friend, take it away, man. I'm just gonna kind of deal with this while you go.
but as I was saying, we have kind of an unbroken, narrative where we have Dominic Shade showing up in Perthan's Ford and doing his things in Caine Blackknife, and then he gets captured at the end of Caine Blackknife, and he's taken through the Dill to Earth, and is offered this deal at the end of Caine Blackknife, and accepts it at the beginning of Caine's Law, and that's where he sets off all this like crazy time stuff, because now he has the powers of a god and he can like break the covenant of Pyracanth and go back and stuff. But so it can't occur from there. But then we also see Jonathan Fist, where Caine goes back to change things in Perthan's Ford, but it doesn't fit in there either, because again we have an unbroken narrative of what's going on with Jonathan Fist in that, where he ends up, he orchestrates the whole scene, the spectacle at the duel between Orbeck or not Orbeck and our champion of Krill, who is no longer our champion of Krill, Lady Angvas. And there's just no room in either of these narratives for that scene to take place. But because it takes place at the beginning of the book, there's clearly importance in the scene, and I'm not sure how it fits in. Like,
well,
Yeah,
Stover is aware, I think, of what he was doing, because, and I couldn't find this in the Google book that I was actually searching through for some quotes. It didn't include this at the very beginning, but the audiobook included this, and it was a quote from Stover himself, or I should say a quote, just an author's note. It starts off with. Did you start off with an author's note in your hard copy?
Where he says like some events in this book take place before, after, and some never took place. So,
basically, what he says word for word is, see here. So, several parts of this story take place before the events depicted in Act of Atonement Book 1, Caine Blackknife. Other parts of the story take place after. Still other parts take place before and after, both. Some parts may be imaginary, and some were real only temporarily, as they have subsequently unhappened. And I think this kind of literally tells you everything you need to know, because, I mean, this book was all over the place. It was all over the place.
We're left to determine for ourselves, in a lot of cases, what we think happened.
Like, I think this might be one of those parts imaginary that Stoker was talking about. In this case.
So I'm not sure. Like, there are so many different ways, even among those options given to us in the author's note, that scene could theoretically fit in. And one thing that really like makes me wonder if it did happen or not is that this book is so non-linear in narrative.
Oh my god.
Very purposely non-linear. And it ends with the prologue. The last section, the last page and a half of this book is titled Prologue.
Yeah. That confused
and if he's
the shit out of me on my first listen.
If he's, putting the prologue at the end, might this scene at the beginning not be an epilogue?
Oh. I hadn't, for some fucking reason, I hadn't considered that.
That's a good theory, and it does stand to reason.
It does stand, yeah, I agree with Pat. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, though, because we still don't really have much context for what the hell is happening in that fucking scene.
Right, yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, I was not personally, like, just diving into Stover's style here, and my points there, I was not a fan of this kind of nonsensical, nonlinear, and counterintuitive narrative. I mean, this book jumped all over the place.
Yeah.
It was hard to follow, and especially, with me, I was listening to an audiobook because I'm back to work full time and a half now. So I'm listening to the audiobook, and boy, oh boy, this was a difficult one to kind of wrap my head around, to say it again. I mean, there were parts when I was, okay, hold on, what the fuck is happening? I have to rewind again. And I'm used to doing that because I get interrupted here and there by coworkers. I'm still at work. I still have to do my job. It's usually, fairly often I have to stop and rewind and listen to something again. But with this book, it was a whole different beast entirely. I mean, usually there's still, a linear a linear component to the narrative. If you go back far enough, you will still be going backwards. But in this fucking book, sometimes I'm missing things. I'm rewinding 4 minutes, but chronologically speaking, I'm still going forward in time, and it fucked me up so much. And I don't know. I'm worried that really impacted my overall opinion of this book.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine doing this on audio, especially for the first time.
Like, we did have a lot of time in between, like we mentioned, last podcast and this podcast. We've had a month, probably. I've listened to the book 4 times in some parts. I still don't fucking understand a large part of it.
Yeah, it's, it is an involved book. It's, I think in the review I wrote of it after I first read it, I called it like a runaway roller coaster, basically. Where it was this crazy fast-paced ride that just went off the rails, and but then after reading it a second and third time now, I'm like, okay, maybe it didn't really go off the rails so much as the rails don't behave according to the laws of physics.
Okay, well now you're starting to sound like the horse witch.
Yeah. Well, what you said makes sense, and what the horse witch says often doesn't.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, and so,
or it doesn't make the sense that you want it to make. It's just such a she's a weirdo, but I actually kind of like her. So.
That's what happens, in my opinion, with postmodernist philosophy.
Yeah,
it's 90% bullshit and 10% inversion.
Yeah,
it's like, no, you're not sitting there watching the TV. The TV is sitting there watching you. That's what's happening.
Damn, that is a dark.
And we get a lot of that in this book.
And it's funny because this book is so heavily philosophical. It brings some of the ideas from Blade of Taishal full circle.
Yeah.
Where Heroes Die and Caine Black Knife were a little more straightforward adventure novels with a bit of political philosophy thrown in there and stuff, and literary criticism. Blade of Taishal and Caine's Law are much more focused on philosophical themes and stuff like that, and so it brings it full circle, of course. And I think he ends up running into a bit of an issue with some of the philosophical elements he raised in Blade of Taishal, and needs to not subvert, but to oppose them in this book. And the biggest thing is what we talked about on our Blade of Taishal episodes, how when Caine was in the pit, he comes to this sort of realization. He has this personal apotheosis regarding choice and how nothing really matters, everything's a coincidence, and the only way to get through is to recognize that I need to assign my own meaning to things, and I need to make my choices and fuck everything else. Except when we get to Caine's Law, we see that like you can't operate like that. You can't have that sort of purely nihilistic worldview. You can't truly ascribe to Cainism as a philosophy. And we get so many times over the course of this series where people ask why did you do this, and Caine says reasons are for peasants,
yeah,
and he says what, it doesn't matter why,
and then
all
Caine
that matters
addresses this
is the he says all that matters is the act itself, and then you deal with the consequences later. And in this book, though, we see that no, there are reasons, and even Caine has reasons. Yeah. And I think there's one of the chapters from Duncan's point of view in the Now of Always, the little campsite god space that Caine set up to build his whole plan in this, where Duncan is talking with the horse witch, and he realizes the why is the horse switch, the why is love. And that ties back, even though this contradicts some of those philosophical themes from Blade of Taishal, it matches the subtext of the previous 3 books, where it doesn't matter how much Caine protests that reasons are for peasants and that why doesn't matter. Caine always had a why, and it was always because I love something, because I love my family, I love my wife, I love this world. And here we see once again, love is the driving factor, and it is his love for the girl who died in the stable fire. Mm-hmm. And he did all of this to make her not die.
I mean, that's what the novel is named after. Caine's Law, as you find out in this book, turns out to be a metaphor for love, which kind of, it would come across as cheesy if it wasn't explained over such a long and, complicated but still kind of fulfilling narrative. I was still, and I don't understand why, but by the end of this book, I was still a little satisfied, despite the fact that I was still so confused. And it's a very weird feeling.
Yeah.
Right?
I was definitely satisfied.
Yeah, right? Like,
on my second reading. My first reading, I finished this book and I was unsatisfied.
Right,
because I didn't understand everything that went on in it.
I'm pretty sure
and now that I understand much more about it, I'm like, okay, yes, this came together, order out of chaos kind of thing right at the very end. And also the last scene of the book is just one of the most badass things ever, where the dragon flies overhead and 3 other dragons follow it, and they're just like,
how many dragons do you think are on Otherworld?
Yeah.
It was, it was great. Speaking on Stover's style still in particular, like, I want to know what you guys thought about the chapter epigraphs and how they actually referenced back to quotes from the previous books. Like, I thought it was kind of cool. Like, I thought it added a nice sort of flavor of nostalgia to the whole thing, remembering where this journey started, remembering the different points along the way, and being able to directly contrast those sort of ideas and those character moments with what's happening now. Like, with Caine's character, we have an entirely different view of Caine in this book. But again, still though, like, what did you think of the chapter epigraphs? Was it, like, appropriate, or would you have done something else perhaps?
I thought they were good. I'm glad they were there. They kind of gave me the impression that he had planned the story and the arcs well in advance.
Yeah, okay.
Or he's just smart enough to know. He's smart enough to A, be consistent, and B, use his consistency at the appropriate times.
I mean, he did seem to choose the perfect quotes.
Yes.
To begin off these chapters. So, he either had to do a lot of homework on himself, or he just has such a vivid memory of what he's written that he was able to perfectly insert those appropriate lines at the appropriate places.
So there's an ironic aspect to this in that, yes, it's been consistent the whole time from book 1 to now, but each book has been substantially different in the way it's written and the way it's played out. Most notably this last one, as far as style and aesthetic go.
So, regarding the epigraphs, I loved it. I've read enough books, especially science fiction and fantasy books, that use epigraphs in some manner or another. You have, Brandon Sanderson's famous for this in Mistborn and the Stormlight Archive, where every chapter has an epigraph that ties into some greater narrative in some way. You get like Scott Lynch in the Gentleman Bastard sequence, who doesn't do one before every chapter, but does one before each part in the book. But those epigraphs are like real world quotes from like Scott Lynch's favorite poems.
No shit.
And short stories and things like that.
It's been a while since I read Lynch. I actually don't remember that.
And so what Stover has done in this is something I haven't encountered before, and that is using quotes from real world books, but using his own books. And instead of just using like a brief quote for a thematic touchstone at the beginning of a chapter or a part of the book, he has those lines very specifically either mirror moments in the chapters or foil moments in the chapters, where we can see right there, reading this quote from Hari Michelson to Duncan Michelson 30 years ago, and then seeing how much Hari or Caine or Jonathan Fist or Dominic Shade or whatever you want to call him, how much he has changed as a person from, his younger years to now. And then seeing quotes from Heroes Die and seeing how much he's changed from then to now. And things like that. So I thought it was a really deft narrative device. And regarding Pat's point on like how it seems like he either was smart enough to use things going backwards, or he knew in advance what he was planning on doing. I think he must have known in advance. Just from my own my own experience with writing and writing sequels, and like, it doesn't matter how many times you've read your own book, nobody knows their own book that well. Like that you could just be like, you know what? As I'm writing this other book, I'm just gonna take this one line that I remembered from 3 books ago. Like he
You'd
had
have to be like a
planned
literary
all of this
savant
out
to be able to pull something off like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like even like I will admit, for books that I plan on writing in the future, I do make use of chapter epigraphs, or maybe it might just be parts of the book, but I still do have a lot of them written already. I do love the aesthetic of it, and in this book, I felt like he carried it off really well.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to start talking about our impressions of distinct characters?
I'd just like, before we jump into that, to contrast this and another book, Crime and Punishment. Now, I'm going to talk about it a lot, but, we don't need a spoiler alert for this. Like, it's a fucking classic. Like, if you haven't read it by now, then it's your
Crime and Punishment.
They're almost inversions of one another. In the philosophy behind Crime and Punishment is tied up in the plot, which goes something like, a man sets out to commit a murder. And he has every justification for doing this, and the world will no doubt be a better place without the person that he's going to kill. The lives of everyone that person is involved with will be better. But when it comes right down to it, and the murder is committed, the author puts forth that, no, this is still not justified. Even though all of these potential good things could come out of it, this act was in itself a bad thing. Now, let's looking at this book for a minute. Caine's notion of all excusing love, very reminiscent of Circe in Game of Thrones, and her her much vaunted love for her children, contrasts with that rather sharply. It's not so much even that Caine is trying to excuse the things that he's done because of his love. It's almost that they don't even matter because of his love.
Yeah, I get that.
And I'm not denying that his love is real and that it has an effect on him. But we, as the reader, or at least I, had to ask, well, does love actually excuse anything? Does it make anything... does it turn any act that in other situations which would be considered evil into something good?
Yeah, and Stover kind of makes us a bit of a trap in this book, because he sort of obfuscates that philosophy or the implications of this philosophy by the fact that pretty much most of the results of what Caine is doing for his love turns out good. It's like for the better. Right, it's stopping the blind god. It's preventing the horrific destruction via virus of 95% of all sentient creatures on Overworld. It's breaking down the caste system and rebuilding a fairer government on Earth and things like that. So it's easy to root for him and sort of dismiss his philosophy as like something that, like, oh, of course it's good. Look at how it turned out. Mm-hmm. But it's like, it's also right there in plain sight, because Caine talks so much in this to Duncan about how you make this choice and you pull the sword out and you say yes. Who knows what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
It's a gamble. It could, and that in the moment, textual thing there has the same sort of implications on if somebody actually tried to live according to this philosophy of love excuses all. Because, who knows what, like they're unhealthy kinds of love or infatuation and things that could drive somebody to do horrible things.
I would argue that that's the love that Circe feels, certainly.
Yes, yeah.
And to a lesser extent, Caine. Caine is not on the same level as Circe
Yes.
in that regard. At least some of Caine's motivations are good. Or the results that he wants to achieve are good, I should say.
Yes. Yeah.
He might be motivated to try that for different, more complicated reasons than...
And even, like, the worst thing he ever did, I would say, arguably, was like, the genocide of the Black Knife Clan. And you know, we're humans reading this from a human perspective, so, like, that comes off as, like, kind of a good thing. Like, this super sadistic, evil, inhuman horde of Ogreloi, like, oh yeah, like, they torture people to death. Of course they should be killed en masse. Like, of course it's not a problem that Caine broke them. But at the same time, you have to consider, like, you know, you bring that to our real world terms, and how many times in history have cultures looked upon other cultures as inhuman savages and perpetrated horrific crimes on them. Like, and even today, you know, you still have some of these, like, rabid, you know, nationalist and political agendas that see other human beings as less than human. And this is one of the brilliant things about speculative fiction, about science fiction and fantasy in particular, is how you can draw these parallels that, as a reader, you can choose to read a little more closely and dig into them and consider what it means for you in the real world, and kind of be self-reflective about it. Or you can just read through it and be like, oh no, it's just like a cool assassin story where this guy came out on top. Like,
yeah, the road to hell, right?
Yeah.
But speaking, though, on Caine's whole philosophy, do you want to dig into his character and discuss exactly where it went and how we feel about that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Caine.
Rob, kick it off.
Yeah, I'll kick her off. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we get to see an entirely different side of Caine in this installment. We see him more overtly compassionate than we've ever seen him before. There's the horse he saved, and I have a quote written down here that was very, definitive for me. He said to the horse, "Don't be afraid. I can't promise you'll never be hurt, but I will not hurt you. I will never hurt you, and if I might ease any of your pain, I will. That's not who I used to be, but it's who I am now. Don't be afraid." And I read that, or rather I heard it, and I thought, what a stark contrast to the man that we just finished reading about previously in Caine Blackknife. This man who would commit genocide, the burning of Ogrello cubs, just for his reputation, for money and fame and respect. And I do want to say, I think it's a mark in Stover's favor that he can affect such a change without making it feel too alien. Caine somehow still feels like Caine, despite all that we see him do and learn that he's done and that he will do. He still feels like Caine. And I think that, like I said, is just, a huge point in Stover's favor.
Yes, I very much agree. I thought he did a masterful job of developing Caine's character and making changes to his character surprising, despite setting a very thorough groundwork for that development. Like, and he was able to do it, I think, in this book because he got to play around with timelines. And we got to see Caine during, a version of the Faltaine County War and afterward. And we get to see him still being, the ruthless Caine who's just meeting the Horsewitch and just starting to change. And and so when you get to jump around in the timeline a little bit, it's like, all right, we don't see most of the actual change happen. Most of the Caine we see in this book has already undergone this transformation. Which, in the Now of Always scenes and the Jonathan Fist sequences when he goes back to Perthan's Ford. But then, like I said, we see those Reigning Weird and Horsewitch scenes where he's just starting to learn how to be a better person and how to be more empathetic. And so it's like the foundation's there. It makes sense that later in the book, when we see him as Jonathan Fist going on his like adventure through time with Angvas, that he's so kind But even then, in those scenes, like when he goes in to buy the horse from that guy, right, to rescue the
Yeah.
horse, and
Mhm.
he that scene where you're talking about when he tells the horse he won't hurt him, but he goes into that inn hoping he gets an excuse to kill
Oh
somebody.
yeah, that's something that Angvas had confronted him about. Or
Yeah,
was it the horse? No, it was
it was
Angvas.
Angbas. Yeah,
Yeah, she had confronted him about it. She said, "You went in there to start this." Like,
yeah.
then Kane's defense is, "Well, I didn't tell him to pull the knife." Speaking of, leading to one of my favorite one-liners in the entire book. We'll discuss that later. But Kane's whole defense was, "I didn't tell him to pull that knife," and again, he kind of applies this means justify, or the end justifies the means kind of philosophy, where he says, "Who cares? He's rich. He's temporarily rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's happy." It's like, well, you kind of put a blade through his arm and threatened his life and humiliated him in front of everybody. Whether or not you believe he deserved it for the treatment of his horse, I think that's kind of aside the fact of what Angvas was clearly confronting him with. It was his attitude, his approach to the problem.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, I get why Stover didn't give us this moment of catharsis that we would expect to see in any other work of fiction. He's trying to imply that changes this profound can only occur over time.
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, that's
Fair,
all well and
fair.
good, but and true, but I think you'll find that if someone is as far gone as Caine was, in order for him to start that long process, there has to be a moment, an event, something that jars you out of your sense of what's comfortable. Because Caine, in his murderous ways, was comfortable in those ways, just like anyone else would be, having lived with himself for that many decades.
Well,
So I'm just a little like, what's the moment for Caine where he decides he needs to change?
it's
I don't
when
even think
the
we got a
it's
moment.
when no, it's when the girl died in the stable fire.
Oh, okay, but this isn't the Caine that we know. This is an alternate version of Caine.
Well, it's the original Caine, and it's
So
the
the
Caine who
blacksmith or whatever?
no,
No?
it's Dominic Shade who went to Perthan's Ford at the beginning of Caine Black
Oh,
Knife.
and then she burned.
So before the events of Caine Black Knife, the Faltaine County War happened.
Yeah.
And she burned in the fire. And Caine then left and went to Perthan's Ford and got captured and takes the the oil in the deal with, or non-deal with, the Board of Governors at the beginning of Caine's Law. And when he becomes a god himself, he breaks the covenant of Pyrrhaconth because he's the Sword of Man and he can do that. And he goes back and rewrites history. And the rewriting of it is having her be the horse witch instead of just some girl that Caine fell in love with. And so he unhappened the whole original Faltaine County War where she died specifically to bring her back. And that's what the one chapter toward the end is. It's I think it's the Now of Always, and like the Now of Always 6 or 7 maybe, and it's called All About the Girl. And then Now of Always 10 is called Reasons for Peasants, and it's basically this whole flipping of, it's like, no, reasons are not for peasants. Everything has a reason.
Yeah, I think it was Dominic. Jesus, it was his father that approached him with that line and said, "I guess in the end, it really is all about the girl."
So
Was that his father that said that to him?
yeah, so the Now of Always 10 is like the final chapter in the book, and it's from Duncan's point of view.
Yes.
And it starts off with Caine and Milcoth converse softly, some distance away. Chris and Angvas walk together idly among the trees. The horse witch braids her garland, and Duncan finally gets it. Ah, he sighs into the dappled green. Ah, of course. He understands now, or thinks he does. Someone unhappened the slave woman, and now there is a horse witch, which means she can be unhappened too. And that's why Caine wants Duncan to make this choice and pull out the sword so that it can't be unhappened anymore.
Oh.
That it becomes permanent.
Shit. Okay, there was a little click there. Okay.
And it goes on. He says,
a whole
he's-
myriad of things just made sense to me. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Duncan says he's done this, is doing this, is rewriting the entire structure of reality for you. She smiles past the flowers. That's very romantic.
With a capital.
Yeah,
I think that was what Duncan
capital
said
R
next
as
time.
well.
Yeah, I remember this. Okay, yeah. That makes a little more sense now. Okay.
So,
yeah, I mean, hell, since we're on the subject of the horse witch, you want to start discussing her, or is there more about Caine you want to dive into first?
not right now. I have a little more I want to talk about, but we can
Yeah.
save that for like kind of last thoughts before the end.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So, oh, actually, shit, what am I saying? There was one thing I wanted to bring up about Caine. The fact that we finally get to see him challenged in the form that is the man, Tucker, or / Tanner, whatever you want to call him. I fucking loved that character. I was endlessly
I was going to say we got to
guy.
talk about Tanner after the horse switch, but we can
Oh,
talk about
for
him
sure.
right now.
Well, I mean, I just, the reason I wanted to talk about Tucker / Tanner is because, I mean, I'm pretty certain the reason I love that character so much has to do entirely with his interactions with Caine. So I feel like it kind of follows that up nicely. I mean, we never throughout, Heroes Die, Blade of Tyshal, Caine Black Knife, we never really got to see anyone challenge Caine, at least, in terms of just banter. And would you say banter was on the...
No,
was on the...
Not in terms of banter. I thought you were saying like physically challenging, in one-to-one combat.
Yeah, no, sorry. I mean, even Wild Koth wasn't very challenging to Caine in one-on-one combat.
It was Bairn, and the reason Bairn was that challenging was because he had all of these magical effects from Milkoth, where he was faster and stronger and could be invulnerable temporarily and things like that.
Still not invulnerable to a kick to the nuts, though, was he?
Milkoth wasn't.
Well, yeah, but you said it came from Milkoth. Sorry, I should have specified what I meant there. Yeah.
But despite that, though, like throughout all the books, Caine repeatedly says, "Yeah, I'm a monastic. I'm far from the most dangerous one."
Oh, he has a whole little part, and
finally we get to see one here, where he's like, "I've been telling people for years, I'm not that dangerous compared to some of the people the monastics have."
Yeah,
this guy right
here,
even
close to the
he
best.
might be one of the best.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not even close to the best. This man, Tucker, he's close to the best. I don't know, but then he admits that he hasn't really affiliated with many of the monastics assassins.
What a great moment was that when Tanner showed up on Earth at the end as like a social police.
So many great one-liners happened just in the 5 minutes that followed. It was great. I mean, I fucking loved it. And just the fact that he was not only able to take on Caine, like Caine says, not only are you as, not only as, like, you're as good as people think I am, I think was what he said to Tanner. And I was like, God damn, that's a remarkably humble but terrifying thing to say when you're listening to Caine say it. But just the banter, the witty back and forth, and the way he shuts down everything that Caine even says. I mean, no one's been able to do that to Caine up to this point. No one's been able to shut Caine down, or at least go toe to toe with him in a match of verbal wits. But holy shit, I'll give it to Tucker. He fucking took the cake on that one. That was...
Yeah, we'll revisit some of his lines when we get to our favorite one-liners at the end here.
Shit, definitely. Yeah,
I definitely like Tanner. He was an interesting new addition. To the cast.
It almost made me wish that we got him earlier in the series.
Yeah, not
he would have been fun.
Giver of fucks. Tanner was.
He was a fun character in a series that doesn't have many fun characters.
Yeah,
there are a lot of like heavy, weighty characters who push the limits of what you're comfortable reading in many cases, and even those who don't, it's just like, all right, this is this is a sad or trying character arc. And then Tanner, he's just like, yeah, man, I'm just out here doing my job, like cracking wise, and
he's not looking for a bigger picture.
Tanner fits, whereas you could drop Lift into this book and she would die of apoplexy in about 5 minutes, as would many other of your standard comic relief characters.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna open another beer. Let's pray for me. Hope this one doesn't explode everywhere as well. Wait a second. No, we're good, ladies and gentlemen. Okay.
Hey. Let's move on to the horse switch.
regarding the horse witch, I'm a little ambivalent about the horse witch, as I'm sure a lot of people would be. And as Pat said at the top of the podcast, she seems to say a whole lot of nothing, regardless of any sort of even unconventional wisdom that I can attempt to spin it with. She said, no, she's still inexplicably likable, and I don't know why I kind of like her. She's a very kind person. Again, in a book or a series filled with so many ugly things and people and events, but she's still, for some reason, to me, likable. And I think this stems from hearing her tell, in part, from hearing her tell Pallas Rill off in such an eloquent way. And I have it written down here for those who just want to hear it again. Do you know why he hasn't killed you yet? It's faith. He loves her, and he doesn't know what destroying you will do to her. But I do, and it's not much. So you should be nicer to people. You should understand. I'm trying to help you, even though you don't deserve it. Eventually, he'll believe me about faith, and then he might just execute your slag ass, river bitch. I was like, oh, damn, that was good. That was right on par.
Favorite horse witch moment.
Oh my god, that was right on par with Businessman in Wizardborn, telling that one guy. Oh my god, that was. I mean, I'm not going to spoil that particular spot for somebody who might want to go back and read that for themselves, but that was a great one-liner too. Like, this was right on par with that. I think that was great.
Yeah, and that's what the horse witch is kind of as a character. She is what she says, which is amusing for a character who doesn't talk much and doesn't like talking, but she is what she says, and it's not like she is what she says she is. She is the words she speaks, and and so you get a lot of these things where she says these like cryptic, weird, like what did you?
Things,
all right, I'm just gonna gloss over that and move on. But then at other points, she says things that are either at turns deeply, profound, or else have these startling moments of levity.
Yeah.
Where she adapts some of like Caine's language and mannerisms just out of nowhere, and you're like, whoa, didn't see that coming.
Were you being a dumbass? Oh, I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was definitely a source of unexpected comedic relief at times. Unexpected being the key word there, for sure.
Yeah, like, so the first time I read these books, I didn't really like the horse witch much. I thought, like, she was good for a couple of one-liners, and that was it. And I remember, like, because I liked Pallas Rill a lot the first time I read through, and I was disappointed with the way her character ended. And I always kind of wished that she and Hari, or she and Caine, could have ended up together. But after reading through a couple more times, I have a greater appreciation for the horse witch, and I see how she is specifically constructed to be a match for Caine.
Yeah. Oh, she is such a perfect match for Caine. Such a perfect match for him. I did like that he ended up with her over. This is, I guess, in a manner in which you and I differ, Drew. I really didn't like Pallas Rill all that much, and I was really glad that Caine found someone else, especially someone else on his level, if that's the phrase you want to use. Someone who could, tame him.
Well, and you were just talking earlier about how few characters there were who could verbally spar with Caine, and that is the horse witch.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Well, her though, it's because she just. It's not in the same way as Tanner. Tanner is just very clever, I suppose. The horse witch just takes what you say and just rips it up and shows you the pieces. Like,
yeah.
She just, she's different, but she still gets that job done. So I think she's perfect for Caine.
Yeah, agreed. I'm profoundly neutral about Pallas Rill as a character.
Profoundly neutral.
But
I like it.
Their relationship, Caine and Pallas's, that is their feelings might be genuine, but that doesn't mean that it's a good relationship. Yeah. And that's kind of the conclusion that we have to come to, that Caine is better off with the horse witch than Pallas. And so I was satisfied in that regard.
Yeah. I just wish like there had been more of an opportunity for them to work out their dysfunctional relationship instead of just having her die. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
I can see that.
But at the same time, it's like,
with it.
When you consider it, there really was a lot of time for them to work on it, and they didn't. just
Yeah, there
all
were
that time
years.
appeared.
There were 6 years between Heroes Die and Blade of Tyshal, I think, right?
Like all that time just didn't appear on the page. So,
Yeah.
you know, the end result, I think, is a healthier relationship for Caine.
The author had other plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chopped in half by the undead, possessed corpse of Bairn.
Not a fate that anyone would envy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But moving on, I want to just talk briefly about Gail Keller and Simon Fowler. Robaball.
Sure. I didn't really write down anything about them, but I can just give, basic impressions. What did you want to say?
It's cool to me how he made them into sympathetic characters by the end of this book.
Were they, though?
Oh, I certainly think so. They were at least pitiful.
Yeah.
They weren't
pitiful.
contemptible the way like the way Gale is built up in Heroes Die and Blade of Tyshal when he's Hari's secretary. Like, he's just a smug little rat, and you hate him every time he shows up. And then in this, he's a broken man. He realizes that he's ruined his life by doing what he did, and Caine even sees that in him and reaches out to him and offers him a chance. Both Gale and Simon, especially Simon Fowler, because he's got his family and he's got cancer and all this, and Caine like sets it up so that he can be cured and everything at the end. And that, I think, is a hallmark of Caine's change, where in the past he never would have shown any kind of mercy or empathy toward an enemy who screwed him over the way those two guys did.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
So
yeah,
and then of course it ties in also where I think it's a little bit of showmanship, but also a little bit of empathy, where Caine asks Simon Fowler, he's like, or was it Gale? At the end, where he's like, "Hey, you should step up to the window here. You're gonna want to see this."
Oh yeah, and then we get his I did like the fact that, again, as a closing scene, I think it was a nice choice by Stover to show exactly what's happening on Earth, and just we get to see. I think Gale might have been the perfect person to show that to get their reaction. I mean, then again, one could argue that fucking anybody would have that reaction to dragons flying through the fucking sky.
Even Caine says, like, in that scene, he's like, even he was trying to keep his jaw off the carpet.
He was trying to keep a poker face, but even he couldn't. I mean, it's not often you see fucking dragons flying through the eye, and he's like, guess how many fucking dragons we still have on Overworld? And you're like, oh, shit. Yeah, that was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, your technology doesn't work on Overworld, but Overworld magic works here.
in a lot of limited ways, I suppose. I mean, Caine wasn't able to completely obliterate all the Sekmen's heads past a radius of, what it was, like a mile or two?
Yes, but there are Dylan all over the Earth.
Oh, there are many, yeah, and they can come out they don't know where all of them, even the people on Earth don't know where they're all located, but the people on Overworld do.
Yes.
Caine does, and he can show up at a moment's notice at any of them. And I love the fact, so can Angvasa. That is awesome. The idea of a hero that can just pop up wherever she's needed, or at least close to wherever she's needed, that's fucking cool.
Yeah, should we go into Angvas? Because
yeah, sure. I mean, I've only got one further thought about Angvasa, like past what I went over last episode, and that is just that she is still such a badass. And I would say that I like Angvasa, especially by the end of this, and seeing how vital she was and how honorable she was. I would say that I like her even more than I did Murad, but we did see her do a few inappropriate things,
yes,
depending on who you are, I guess. As Caine would say, whatever floats your boat. But some of those actions aren't exactly ones that I can condone, so.
Yeah, and of course there are some excuses to be made for that particular scene where, like, she's literally going insane. Like,
oh yeah, she's just.
But because of that, I loved her character after being the champion of Krill, when she returns to being, just like a human.
Yep.
She's no longer a whatever theophanic fetch, because that scene humanized her, not in a great way, when she assaults Caine.
Yeah.
Not in a great way, but it humanized her. And then the rest of it is like showing her making human mistakes not to the extent that she did in that scene, but making human mistakes while also retaining the purity of heart and the heroic aspect of her personality, and the resulting Angvas that we get during, her little adventures with Caine and things like that, and to the end of the book. Like, I love her. She's maybe my favorite character in this series, with the exception of Caine.
Damn. I mean, I still came out of it liking her, but I don't know. I just a bit of her earlier actions kind of tainted it for me. But she did definitely go somewhere that I approved of afterwards.
Yeah, like I loved how she just got this great liking for beer and would just walk around everywhere with like a keg of beer.
Yeah. I did, and she did have a few epic one-liners and a couple shining moments.
We're gonna get at least one of them from my 3.
Oh, for sure, definitely.
So.
Oh, you only have 3? I thought I just wrote down a fucking shitstorm of one-liners here. I got 100.
Oh, all right.
Well, maybe not 100, but yeah, I got a lot of them, and some of them did come from Angvas. Like she was awesome, and not just one-liners, but she had some just straight up badass fucking acts, like when she was fighting with Caine and she picked up that one guy with one fucking hand and threw him overhand across the room into the fire. I mean, holy shit, that moment to me felt like when you get like a new hamster and then the dog just picks it up and fucking runs with it, and you're like, no, oh shit, no, fuck. That's kind of what it felt like to me.
But no, the other scene with her that I loved was when Caine goes to get Torinel's blood or hair or whatever he can get his hands on.
Yeah,
and Caine's like just getting wrecked in the street, and the ogres are like chucking, just like steel ball bearings at him
at
and
like
stuff.
400 miles an hour, just blasting shit up.
Yeah, and then she shows up and he's like, hey, yeah, she's a Knight of Krill, you don't want to mess with her. And they're like, oh yeah, whatever. And he throws one at her, and she just like catches it and throws it back at him, just like
and blasts his fucking skull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then all the like dozens of Kirindal's security, they're like, yeah, I got something to do back there. Like
urgent business was discovered elsewhere.
Yeah, she did have her shining moments. I will give her that. It was enjoyable to read. Yeah.
She needs to run Earth for a little while.
Oh,
after their little coup.
I would love that.
Who else is gonna do it?
And we still got this remarkable moment of this kind of this touching moment of humanity when she was told by Ravenlock that she resembles greatly Krill himself, and that she's a very honorable, and then she reminds him of Krill, and she's brought to tears. I'm unworthy of that kind of praise.
Like, she's so pure-hearted, and I love her. Like. She's the only probably truly good person in all of, well, except for maybe Maraid.
Maraud, it was pretty fucking cool too.
Yeah. But yeah, I just, Angvas is awesome. She's a fantastic character, and I'm
a lot. Honestly, I think I was shipping Angvasa and Caine more than anybody
else.
Oh
yeah. It was there.
And at one point, he even describes her as
definitely
sexily butch 20-something-year-old. Maybe a little old for her, but.
Yeah. There was definitely sexual tension and mutual attraction between them, but I don't think she could have dealt with Caine on an emotional level. She doesn't have the equipment, the mental fortitude to deal with Caine's baggage. Like
she does kind of, Caine to her does. Her interactions with Caine kind of feel like a kitten with an interesting toy, like she's fascinated, but she doesn't quite understand that this is a dangerous toy and that things are going on more than she knows. Yeah, and she doesn't really quite get a sense of her own kind of naivete. But I mean, by the end, she definitely does, and I still liked where she went. Angvasa was cool. She was a cool read, and I liked pretty much every scene she was in. Pretty much.
Who really can deal with
except for the
emotional baggage?
Yeah, that's why I added
the horse witch, apparently.
The horse witch and
almost.
And
Jesus, I suppose,
and the horse witch, like
after 5 years of medical school.
Like, and the horse witch, the only reason she can is because Caine literally reshaped the fabric of reality to create somebody who could deal with him. Like,
I mean, if you're not gonna use your godlike powers to get a good girlfriend, well, then you're doing it
What's the
wrong.
point of godlike powers then, right? Jesus.
What is the point if you're like?
But you think he would, invent or create somebody who speaks a little more fucking sense?
well,
Don't you want to understand at least half of the things that your fucking betrothed is telling you?
Dude,
Wouldn't
it's
it
a
be
woman.
nice
You're
to
not gonna
understand at least a fraction of them?
No matter whether the woman is a construct or a biological being, you're not gonna understand anyway. So,
as Robert Jordan said in The Wheel of Time, as well try to understand the sun, right?
oh, I thought you were gonna do the women were made to please the eye and trouble the mind.
Oh no, that's a very controversial thing to say.
Yeah.
I would hazard in this 2019.
that's
Yes.
well. Even in the book, it said the men of Emmons Field only said that when they were very, very sure that people like Nynaeve weren't right around the corner.
There were no members of the women's council were in.
They had
read the Wheel of Time,
sticks
damn it.
ready to hand.
Hell yes,
No. Wait to read the Wheel of Time until we start diving into it.
Which should be sometime in the next couple of months, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
Probably.
we're looking at starting that pretty soon.
Anyway,
Here first.
are there any other characters that we want to talk about? Because otherwise, I think we should talk about the series as a whole.
Well, I'd just like to throw out that I liked that there was a little bit of Milekoff in this book.
Yeah.
Because it would have felt wrong almost to end the series without seeing him a little bit more.
I agree. Because he's such a pivotal counterpoint for Caine.
Yeah.
Throughout the first two books, and then was absent entirely from the third. So
the flavor that he lends is nice.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk about our reflections on the series as a whole right now, or would you rather do the one-liners right now and then close with our reflections on?
Let's do the one-liners. Yeah,
the one-liner sounds pretty good, right? Okay. I mean, I'll start with one right now, and then I'll throw it off to you guys. So, as we just briefly mentioned, Angvasa rescuing Caine, for fuck's sake, Caine from the ogres and the tree toppers that were bearing down on him in the street. The next who raises hand against him shall raise no further hand in this world.
Yeah.
Fuck me. I would not mess with somebody who said that. I really wouldn't.
So I have an Angvas line as well, and this is after she helps Caine out with the dudes in the common room when he buys the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And Angvas comes out the door behind me. Krill's love has restored his arm, as well as the other's burns. Yeah, thanks. I shoot her a look. She's got one of those ale casks and a rope slung over her shoulder. I see Krill's love has also restored your beer supply. She sets it in the dirt. And I have yet to assay its quality, which is as well. Alcohol seems to make me disinclined to overlook the imperfections of others.
Yep. Oh, such a brutally honest and clever fucking way to put it, but yep.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much.
Her verbatim is fucking brilliant. Pat, you want to throw one at us?
Pat has stepped away for just a second.
I just opened the thing and saw Pat had stepped away for a second. Okay, I'll throw another one.
He usually takes a step back here because he doesn't love the humor in these. So
no shit, eh? Ooh, interesting. Okay, so let's see here. So Caine to Tucker. I'm gonna have so many between Caine and Tucker. Near the end, as Caine is squeezing more oil out of the guard's body. Okay, he's answering Tucker's question, and he explains that the blood is more like their god's blood, more or less. And then he tells Tucker to step back. This could get a little entertaining. And Tucker goes, "Yeah, good thing. I was about to doze the fuck off." Oh, yeah. I went really loud when I was welding. It was great.
Okay, so you I have a similar a similar quote with the Horsewitch and Caine, and it's towards the very end, and he's trying to convince her to tell him what happened in that unhappened timeline, with the slave girl and all that. Oh, and he says, "Will you tell me, please?" And she says, "You may find this difficult to hear." Yeah, that'll be a damn shame, considering how the rest of it was a fucking carnival.
Yep, I have that one written down here too. That's one of the ones. It's so good.
Oh,
it's It's so fucking good. I think my favorite in the entire novel will be my next one here.
Oh, yeah.
It's when Kaiges says to Caine, "My first word can make you beg for death." And then Caine's epic fucking response, "Your entire fucking vocabulary can't mess up my hair."
Yeah.
Oh, God, it was so good. How do you respond to that? I mean, she did somehow, but how do you fucking respond to a burn that well? Oh, it was good.
So, my next one is it's actually repeated a couple of times, and it's even better the second time. It's when Caine is trying to find out what Tanner's real name is.
Yeah.
And he says, "You can call me Haywood, Lord Jablomi, Marquess of Jamet, and the 11th Earl of Up Your Ass."
Yeah.
and then the second time he starts saying, and Caine's just like, "God damn it!" Like,
yep. Well, yeah. Tanner's second time saying it are literally his dying. Well, I mean, Tanner's first time saying it, I guess, would be his dying fucking words.
Yeah, it's the rest vanished into the blinding yellow flare of power.
Because Caine just loses patience and shoots the motherfucker. Like he just can't even deal with this. That's why I love Tanner so much, because he's the only person that can get under Caine's skin. I mean, there are people who piss Caine off. There are people who Caine will burn the world to watch them burn with it. But there's no one who got under his skin like Tanner did.
Yep.
Ah, what a fucking brilliant character that was. So there's another quote I want to bring up here. Let's see here. Okay, so it's Caine himself explaining something, obviously colored by his language. "Jareth is a suspicious bastard by nature, and instead of shaking Krill's hand, he whips out the Sword of Man and lops it off at the wrist. Krill's hand falls to the ground, and Jareth says, 'And I take your hand to demonstrate my wish for all you shit-swallowing scum-humpers to fuck off and die. But I'm willing to talk peace. When there is true peace between us, I will happily shove this so far up your ass, you could scratch the backs of your eyeballs.'" So now I laughed out loud when I heard that. That was great, And then I realized on my second read-through that, Caine claims to be paraphrasing, but after we really know about who Jareth really was,
that it's very possible he said exactly those words. It's very, very
possible that he said those exact fucking words. And I loved it. I really, really loved it.
Yeah. My last one that I had highlighted was the description of the days and the whole arena set up for the duel between Ongvas and Orbeck. And he says, "Men wearing the mirror-polished full plate of Krillian lords sat in 6 of them. These would be the Lords Legendary. Every single one of them a former champion of Krill, and each very high on the list of people who should under no circumstances ever be fucked with." There are a lot of those lines, and I think I brought up a couple of them in Caine Black Knife, where whenever he's talking about Knights of Krill, just how you should just... They're without spoiling anything, they're like the Bonds Magi in the Gentleman Bastard sequence. They're if you know what you're about, you don't fuck with them. They will ruin your day. And yet Caine just continually fucks with the Krillians.
Yep, stick your hand in the fire. There was a moment in Horse Witch 4, to continue here, when the Horse Witch is telling the story. Who actually, I totally forgot to talk about this story earlier. I want to touch on this right after we're done with our one-liners here.
Mm-hmm.
But the Horse Witch 4 says of this girl who she used to be in another reality, her earliest memory was a rape. And then Caine says, "Jesus." She says, "Is that a name or a curse?" And then Caine says, "Both." And then I laughed out loud, because in that moment, I remembered the first scene in Caine Black Knife, when he says, "My name is a C-word."
Yeah.
It kind of just gave me a little giggle when I realized what exactly Stover did on that particular line there.
Nice.
I just have one more, I suppose, from Raining Weird 2. But this wasn't really so much of a funny line as it just blew my fucking mind when I realized what exactly I had heard. And again, this is one of those one-liners that really gets you. It goes right by you on the first time, but on your second read-through, it means something entirely fucking different. It was in Raining Weird 2. The Horse Witch says to Caine, "You might face justice someday, if there is such a thing." and if it is unlucky enough to find you, absolution is between you and your god. And when she said that, I realized what Stover did. She said, "You might face justice someday," and then I remembered that scene where Caine recognized himself in the mirror as the man who had walked into the clinic on that day when he was a boy. And to me, that was just such a huge defining moment. I was like, holy fuck. Do you think that's exactly what the horse witch was talking about?
Ooh, I don't know if it's exactly what she was talking about,
because
but I do think
is justice. Yes, that's what he is.
I do think that Stover was writing that to specifically create a callback.
I don't know. It's really spoke to me, that one. That one fucked me up.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's another honorary mention I have here. It was in Tomorrow's Yesterday 3, as Caine is sneaking up to the sentry. He internally thinks, if this boy had enough training or natural discipline to hold still, he might have lived through this. But boys and toys. And my brain went, oh, he's masturbating. And then Caine continues with, he can't stop playing with his new knife. And I went, what the fuck is Stover doing to me? Like, that's not a thought I would have had in any other fucking book series except this one. And I had a real introspective moment there. I was like, what the hell? It's really tough. And I'm glad we're finishing this fucking series because I don't like what it's doing to my brain.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of those ones that's unique and you have to take in reasonable measured doses.
Oh, yeah. There's a reason we had to do Skyward in the middle of this series.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Yeah,
well,
we definitely did.
As an interesting segue into the series as a whole, I honestly felt that after Blade of Taishal, the series kind of went downhill.
I agree.
This book, the ending of it, while I was satisfied with a lot of the things that happened in the plot, felt almost anticlimactic because of all the weirdness that was going on. It was hard to build up 100%. The tension and whatnot in the traditional sense. And, I can appreciate a work that's out of the ordinary every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
But, those are my 2 senses for the way it ended. Heroes Die could have been, as we mentioned before, its own standalone book, and most of the time I think it should have been.
Yeah,
because I'm not convinced that the journey from Blade of Taishal to where we end with Caine's Law was worth the heavy price that we pay for reading Blade of Taishal and for reading Caine Black Knight and for putting up with the weirdness of Caine's Law. But
I
think I agree with everything you just said. Yep.
But this is why we have conversations.
So I want to save Rob's reaction till the end because you're the new reader here.
Sure. Okay.
And my reaction to this, this is my 3rd time reading through the series, as I've said before. This is one of my favorite series I have ever read. It is not without its problems, as anybody who's listened to our 7 episodes we've done on this 10 hours of content. I have had plenty of criticisms, but overall, taken as a completed work, I'm blown away by what Matthew Stover did as a writer. How he took a trilogy of 4 parts, but a trilogy. There are 3 acts, and made each act work with each other and tell a full story by itself. Because when we're talking about Heroes Die, that could stand alone. Really, you could read just Blade of Taishal on its own and get a completed story. He gives you enough of the background information. He gives you enough of the world building.
Definitely wouldn't recommend
and gives you a satisfying, concrete conclusion.
Could you imagine just reading Blade of Taishal? Oh my god!
I mean, yeah, that would be quite an experience.
So fucking brutal.
But you could do it. It's a completed,
I guess narratively would make
concrete narrative that has tie-ins to Heroes Die and Caine Black Knife and Caine's Law. So we have, I know the 3rd act is the act of atonement. I think Blade of Taishal is the act of war, and then I don't remember what act Heroes Die was, but But each of the acts is its own story. And again, you could pick up Caine Black Knife and read Caine Black Knife and Caine's Law and get a complete story that you would mostly be able to understand by itself. And this is something that is super rare. You'll get lots of series where the first book can stand alone, because that's how people wrote for a long time. Like before publishing companies, started raking in the dollars for these mega series like The Wheel of Time and The Sword of Truth and A Song of Ice and Fire and Malazan and things like that.
It bothers me that Sword of Truth is on that list, but it is.
Well, yeah, it made a ton of money, but writers would write one book. They're like, all right, I have an idea for a trilogy or a 5-book series or whatever, but they wouldn't get a contract for a whole series. They would write one book, get a contract for that, and then if it sold well, then they'd get the contract for the rest of the series. And that still happens to an extent today, but there is an opportunity to just like get signed to a blockbuster 7-figure contract, like Jen Lyons, for instance, from Tor Books. She just published The Ruin of Kings, which is the first in a new fantasy series, epic fantasy, that she signed this mega contract for, and Tor really wants this to be their new big, like, the next Sanderson kind of thing.
No shit.
And,
that's why you were trying to dive into this one so much. Yeah.
But and yeah, we'll cover that probably eventually, a little later this year.
Definitely
for the podcast. But so it's common to read the first book in a fantasy or science fiction series and have a completed story and be like, all right, I liked that well enough. I didn't love it, so I'm just not going to read on because I have a completed story here. It is uncommon to read the second book and be like, wow, okay, that also is a completed story. And then read the third installment, and that's also a completed story. Like, this is rare, what Stover did here. And he did it in a manner that each of the 4 books, as Pat mentioned earlier, is wildly different in, like, tone and structure from the others. He does crazy things with point of view. He does crazy things with timelines and tenses. Like, this is a really, really ambitious literary work, which is rare for especially like a 90s, early 2000s science fiction fantasy work. A lot of the time it was like very pulpy, poppy, like, let's make some money, and Stover basically said, fuck that. I'm writing this crazy, deep, philosophical literary work. And while he didn't always nail it with those aspects, especially on the philosophical side, he still did it and more or less pulled it off. Like, it's just a really, really impressive work of writing to me, and that's why I love it so much.
So what would you say is your favorite book of all the 4? Your personal favorite, not what you think is the best book, like, from a literary standpoint. What was your favorite? If you had to choose.
This is such a hard question. Like,
I mean, for me, I would say it's Heroes Die.
Heroes Die. Yeah.
Yep, same.
So if it's in terms of like rereadability of a book that I'm like, yeah, you know what, like, I want to sit down and reread this. It's probably Caine Black Knife.
Yeah, or if I'm going to recommend it to a friend or something.
Well, I mean, if I'm going to recommend it, I'm going to give them Heroes Die, but...
Well,
no, start them with Caine Black Knife.
Yeah. Like I said, I could say, like, hey, read this, and they could do it, but...
Yeah, that's part of what you were saying.
But, man, there are things that Caine Black Knife does, that Blade of Tyshal does, and that Heroes Die does, that, because there's such wildly differing types of books, it's hard for me to choose. That's
why I asked the question. I knew it was going to be a difficult choice.
This is a tough question. If you really pinned me down, I would probably say Heroes Die.
Same.
But I think Caine Black Knife is the most fun.
Yeah.
And Blade of Tyshal is the least fun. It's also
it's also the biggest and most
impressive.
So,
it's the most impressive.
Yeah.
So,
and then Caine's Law was just
crazy,
fucking nonsense. Like, to me, it was nonsense. I feel like I could have finished the series with Caine Black Knife and been satisfied, honestly.
Well, except there's no conclusion. That's
fine. It would have been better than the nonsense we fucking got. Is what I'm trying to say. I guess. Well, I don't know.
All right. So Rob, move into. Okay. Let's get your reaction. First time reader.
I'll say, as a first time reader, I enjoyed the acts of Caine overall. I really did. Though there were times when it was hard to remember why. Stover's characters are fucking superb. His prose is excellent, if not particularly original in delivery, I guess. But his knack for one-liners is equal, in my experience, to only one, and that is Scott Lynch, who we mentioned earlier in the podcast. Though between the two, I found Stover's setting and pacing a little more enjoyable. And for those who don't know, like, my one attempt at reading Lies of Locke Lamora ended up with kind of me just losing interest in favor of another book that was just being released at that time, and I never really got motivated enough to return. But I definitely haven't ruled it out for future podcasts. That's for sure. But getting back to Stover,
I had no idea.
Yeah, getting back to Stover though, I think he did some really incredible things. Mile Koth, and of course by extension, Tonal Koth, have to be in my list of top 3 sci-fi fantasy antagonists of all time. Perhaps in the number 1 spot. And I'm aware that I said a lot of these things about Raj Otten in The Rune Lords, but he was honestly edged out after 5 minutes of reading Mile Koth. I mean, Mile Koth was fucking awesome. And I think he was just a major component of why I enjoyed these books as much as I did. Granted, he didn't have much to do with Caine Black Knife or Caine's Law, but he definitely was a reason I was so invested, I suppose. I spent a majority of this last volume completely at sea, but I'd still absolutely recommend the series. It was grim, it was dark, but it was heartwarming at times, and it was endlessly entertaining with this myriad of one-liners that Stover just served up again and again like hors d'oeuvres. And though he's not I will close with this. Though he's not a particularly pleasant person, I do like to think that going forward, we all carry a little bit of Caine inside of us.
I don't want anything from Caine to be inside me.
I want his...
literally or metaphorically.
I want his wits. I want the way he just so irreverently doesn't give a fuck about what anybody says.
I could do with a little bit of Caine's self-assurance.
A little bit. Just not much. You don't want to be Caine. You just carry a little bit of him with you.
Yeah. Well, and it's something that, ties back to what Pat said earlier. Like, it really does affect your mindset as you're reading these books. Like you really start thinking and approaching the books in a certain way because Stover's voice as writing Caine is so powerful.
Yes.
Like, it really is. The character of Caine is the strongest part of this series. And I have never read a single character in all of the many hundreds of books I've read in my 29 years on this planet. I have never read a single character who so completely commands the page.
Interesting way to put it.
And it's like, this is why it's one of my favorite series.
In terms of character voice, I also want to throw another really quick shout out to Stefan Rudnicki, who narrated that audiobook. Yep. What a legend that guy.
He does a good job.
Such a powerful voice. And it was honestly the perfect choice for that audiobook series. He was awesome what he did.
I may have to like check out. I may not go through the whole series on audiobook, but I'll have to check out some particular scenes maybe.
Check out his Mile Koth. He's got a voice like honey on warm bread. It's just like, it's great.
He's also good in Ender's Game.
That's what you had mentioned in our in Heroes Die Part 1.
Although those audiobooks are different in that not every character has its own voice, but most of them do. They have half a dozen, let's say, voice actors. And they all do pretty good jobs. But Stefan Rudnicki stands out as...
who does he do?
He does the narrator and Ender.
Interesting.
Also Graf.
Well, that's what I was expecting you to say was Graf. Yeah. All right.
and Mazer Rackham.
Very good.
Mazer Rackham.
Very good.
Yes.
Have you read any of the Ender books?
I read the first. I read Ender's Game, but I didn't follow with the rest, yeah.
Yeah, that's another one we definitely have to do for the podcast at some point.
Yeah.
But that may be quite a ways down the road. We have a lot on our plate coming up here.
We do.
Yeah, my as far as a closing thought to leave you all with about the series as a whole and its place in sort of the structure of the fantasy that that we have with us. Its effect on the genre was kind of negligible, but that's a risk that you run when you are an innovator in a field of art. Now, most of the authors we read, however good they might be, aren't doing anything like this in the sense that it's mind-blowing and original, and it is an attempt to redefine the way we tell the story.
Yeah.
Now, it might work for us as readers, but it didn't really impact the genre much and was before its time.
Yeah.
The series started before 9/11, and after that event, our fantasy and our stories have been consistently getting darker and darker.
How fucked up is that?
It's very fucked up.
Yeah.
Do you think that was the... Oh, that's a whole other philosophical question, though.
I think it has something to do with it. I don't think it's entirely to do with it, though.
I do think there's an impact there. I think there was an aspect of American culture and American life that lived in a sort of idyllic ignorance, a sort of invincibility.
Yeah.
That was shattered on 9/11, and so moving into stories where people make mistakes and people die and nobody's safe resonated. And this is something I talked about like back in the Heroes Die episodes and in my article on Heroes Die for Tor.com and the sort of context of when it was published and how neither Heroes Die nor A Game of Thrones as like mid to late 90s grimdark publications did particularly well until Robert Jordan gave a cover quote to George R. R. Martin. But I think I said like if Heroes Die, like with no changes, if that exact book word for word had been published in 2004 or 2005, like it would have been one of the most popular fantasy science fiction series of our time. Because the quality of writing is significantly better than a lot of grimdark authors. I mean, like I've read, Mark Lawrence and Joe Abercrombie and Stephen Erickson and like a lot of the new agey grimdark guys, and Stover's better than all of them. I'm sorry, like he's just a better writer. Like
sweet,
like Brent Weeks or I don't know.
We only have the best on this podcast. We only have the best.
I read Brent Weeks. I read at least the Night Angel trilogy. As far as I understand, the rest of his work is better than that. But
Compare Night Angel to Caine. Like, come on.
Yeah, Night Angel was fucking rough. It had a few cool moments, but it was...
Yeah. I mean, from what I gather, like, because I've read the first Lightbringer book, and I was like, this is a little better than
what's
Night
the series,
Angel.
A Pattern of Shadow and Light, or...
No, it's called
What's
Lightbringer.
the name of that? Lightbringer? Okay.
Yeah, the first book is The Black Prison.
Must be
that's
else.
the Sephiroth's Hand series.
Sephiroth's Hand, that's what it was. The ones that kept advertising on Facebook, if you like the Wheel of Time, you'll like this. I was like, okay.
The way to get me to not ever buy a book is to be like, if you like Brandon Sanderson, this is even better. It's like, no, it's not. Shut up.
I know.
Like
anyway,
comparing Caine to a lot of these other characters, it's like trying to get Genghis Khan or Attila the Hun to sing a Panic at the Disco song. There's like, it's just not not going to work very well.
Man, it's distinct. That's for sure.
It is.
Well, so, you guys want to head into the final draft?
I think so. And I want to kick off the final draft because I have two different beers. I want to start with the beer that I'm doing, and then I'll let you guys go, and then I'll finish with my second beer.
Sure.
So the beer I'm drinking is from Verboten Brewing Company in Loveland, Colorado. A great little brewery, by the way. This is a whiskey barrel-aged golden ale brewed with orange and cherry. And it's super good. I'm absolutely blown away. This is like one of the best beers I've ever brought on the podcast.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the whiskey flavor profile from that barrel aging is phenomenal. The orange is just bright and bursting through it. A lot of these like golden ales with brewed with oranges, they'll brew it with orange peel and coriander, and I generally don't like that sort of flavor. Like it gets kind of like like acrid, a little soapy sometimes to me.
Sure.
But this is like, oh man, this is absolutely freaking delicious. And it is called A Million Reasons.
A Million Reasons. Reasons are for peasants, though.
But they're not.
but
they're definitely not. Thank you, Stover, for actually getting around to that.
Yeah, eventually, after a long time. And
I was
through many dark places.
I was looking for beers for this episode. I was really struggling with Caine's Law, where I was like, man, like this is such a weird book. There isn't this like one overarching like moment or like anything jumping out at me. And so like I just went to my local bottle shop and I was kind of combing through and I saw the other beer that I brought today first. And I was like, okay, that's an option maybe. And then I found this and I was like, I've never had this beer before. Sounds interesting. And I loved the thematic impact that reasons have in this series and how Stover, because I disagree with his philosophy in a lot of ways, kind of undercut himself with the reasons thing. And he accepted it by the end. That final chapter is saying like, yes, there was a reason. And as much as Caine likes to say that reasons are for peasants, Caine has reasons. So.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so I brought, as well as Drew, and this is totally coincidental because we talked about this afterwards, I also just happened to bring 2 different beers to the podcast today. Both are from Lost Craft Brewing Company, who I've actually brought onto the podcast before. One of which is actually the same beer that I was actually drinking on that episode. I think Crimson? It was episode 7 or 8. It was Sirius. I did have Crimson. I think was one of them. Okay. Sirius is the other one. This premium pale ale. The reason I brought it again was because I've been struggling not to bring it ever since I tasted it the first time. I wanted to have some diversity. But if you actually go back and listen on the podcast, again, I think it was 7 or 8, there was a moment in the middle of the podcast, I've heard it recently, where in the middle of Drew discussing something, I just went, and that was this fucking beer. So I brought the Sirius back. Unfortunately, for those who might remember, 3/4 of it ended up in my fucking lap at the beginning of the episode. I'm still covered in beer. It feels like I've pissed myself. I haven't cleaned it up yet. I just put some paper towels on the ground here. But the second beer I brought, also from Lost Craft Brewing Company, was something I've never heard of before, and it stood out to me when I looked at it. It says Milkshake India Pale Ale. And I had no fucking clue what that meant. It's called Eclipse with a Z. Okay. Or Z for you Americans.
You say it properly.
So Lost Craft apparently really likes Z's in their words, because if I recall, Crimson was also spelled with a Z.
Oh, it was, wasn't it? Now that I think on it. Yeah, but speaking as to the actual flavor of these beers, I loved the Sirius. It's got a lot of it has some citrus, as you would as I've come to expect with an IPA, but it also had some kind of woody flavor to it as well. I want to say it was like I was going to say evergreen pine, something like that.
Oh, yeah, because it's a pale ale. Yeah, so depending on the hops they'll use in beers, because there are a lot of different types of hops based on where they're grown and stuff, and they'll have different flavor profiles. But a pretty classic staple of like the West Coast IPA style is you get like really piney, like juniper hops.
This has been Flavors of Beer with Drew. Fucking love it. Awesome. And the Milkshake Pale Ale, believe it or not, was actually lighter in color. I wasn't ready for that. It was 6.0%, so I mean it's a little stronger. And honestly, if I'm being totally frank, it tasted exactly the fucking same, at least to me. But again, that's a glowing recommendation considering this is one of the best fucking beers I've ever tasted. And the can, of course, is a very nice kind of brushed white matte kind of minimalistic design. I do kind of like that as well. So yeah, I would highly recommend Lost Craft. Sirius is fucking phenomenal. Eclipse tasted a lot similar, still phenomenal.
Interesting. Yeah, so milkshake IPAs they tend to be brewed with like lactose in them, and
really?
And usually they'll be like a creamier color, like they won't be see-through. I'm totally blanking on the word I'm looking for
opaque?
Yeah, not opaque, but like hazy.
Muddy.
I mean, like
Okay.
hazy IPAs.
Yeah.
Although
Okay.
although
Okay.
milkshake IPAs don't necessarily have to be like that New England IPA, hazy IPA flavor profile, like lots of bright tropical fruits, pineapple and citrus and mango and stuff like that.
Sweet.
Um, but yeah, there are a lot of really cool things going on right now in the brewing industry around IPAs because it's like the most popular style by far, and it has been for years and years.
Mm.
And people are getting bored with it. So it's like, all right, well, what can we do to change it up? And a couple of years ago, that was the new thing was like the hazy IPAs. And yeah.
Sweet. Yeah. What about you, Pat?
Well, like an idiot, I forgot my beer.
Uh-oh.
I mean, you guys had two apiece. I've been
Yeah.
drinking water this whole time.
Oh man.
We filled the quota. How did you not realize it was a water? Was he drinking out of his fucking horn again?
Well, no, I just saw an empty glass over there. I was
Okay.
I mean,
Sweet,
my
sweet.
glasses usually are empty.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, cool,
But
cool stuff.
it was a good episode for me to not have anything because you guys had two each to talk about.
That was perfect. It kind of worked out. It was like synchronicity.
yeah.
But if I didn't forget my beer where I left it, it would have been a summer shanty.
Oh yeah, a Leinenkugels?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is a real nice beer.
Yeah, it's like
Sweet.
a wheat ale just blended with lemonade. It's delicious.
We had the
Yeah.
first day of not quite summer, but of official spring here in Colorado.
Oh man, yeah.
And it's wonderful, so it's exactly
Like,
the kind of beer that one wants on a
The
day like
snow
this.
from last Thursday is finally melted.
Oh,
and-
really? You guys have been like us here? Fuck, man. It's mid-May at this point. And we're still having like 5 degrees above. I guess no. Hold on. For you guys,
Yeah.
oh no, 5 degrees above still makes sense.
Yeah.
Celsius,
It's
it's like
been
5 degrees Celsius. It's like it's fucking cold. in
High
here still.
30s, low 40s here.
I know. Winter won't just fuck off already.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this happens in Colorado. It's like every other year it'll just like dump snow
Yeah.
at the beginning of May. Like a couple of years ago when I was in college, I was like, spring semester writing my term papers the first week of May, and there's huge snowstorm blew through Fort Collins, and like a tree on campus, like the snow was so wet and heavy that like a branch of this 100-year-old oak tree broke off and crushed a
Oh.
kid. And like they had to shut down the whole campus and everything, and like, yeah, it was ridiculous. But it's like every other year we get this bullshit into May.
Mhm.
Yeah, same.
But
Well,
anyway,
yeah.
my second beer is a Schwartz beer. This is a German style, like a dark German. It's from Elysian Brewing Company up in Seattle. It's a pumpkin Schwartz beer. And Elysian is known for pumpkin beers. They generally do really good stuff. I hate to say it, but this particular one was not fantastic. It's probably the worst beer
no
I've
kidding,
brought
eh?
on the podcast.
Damn.
But it's called Dark Knife.
Dark. Oh, come on, really?
So yeah, I
like that.
had to
I like that.
I had to
Where was
close
that 2
off my
episodes ago?
We did get more context for the name Caine Black Knife in this book, didn't we?
Yeah,
Blade of Tai Shal, how it kind of loosely translates.
Exactly. Yeah, so I had to close off my Caine beers with that particular one.
Sweet.
I wish I could recommend it, but it was really kind of meh. The pumpkin notes were absent, and the base beer itself, the Schwartz beer, was not even close to the best one I've had. I think this is the first beer I brought on that I haven't had at least a decent review of. But
Wow.
yeah, it was thin.
That's how you know you're honest.
It was kind of acrid, like a little metallic. Just wasn't what I was expecting from Elysian, because I've had some of their pumpkin beers in the past and I've had a couple of really good pumpkin beers, but this one was
Sweet.
not it.
Right. All right. Well, that's fair enough. So, what are we doing next week, my man?
So next week we are going into a 2019 release. So
Yeah, we are.
We're doing some new stuff here. A science fiction novel by Arkady Martin called A Memory Called Empire.
Yes.
And our current plan is to do the entire book for it. Although we may end up going a little long on that episode too, because it's a pretty involved book itself. But yeah, so A Memory Called Empire. It came out just in March, I think, and yeah, you know, we're trying to get a little more of new releases, because we want to be able to discuss not only some of the classics and some of our old favorites, but we want to stay on top of new trends in science fiction and fantasy, and we want to be able to discuss books that maybe people are seeing advertised now and are considering whether or not they want to read them. And so if you've seen this book advertised, or if you haven't but you're interested in a new, you know, space opera, I would definitely recommend, you know, picking it up, reading along, and listening next week. So
right on.
Yeah, so I mean, this has been 19 episodes now.
19. The next is number
Man,
20.
We can almost legally drink, guys.
Well, you can if you live in Canada.
Hey!
Hey, add some cheers.
Good shit, Canada. Good shit.
But yeah, as well, kind of news for the podcast. We just expanded to Spotify, so we're now on. I mean, maybe you're listening to this on Spotify, maybe you're not, but we're also on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes. We're hosted on Player FM and Podcast Addict, so we're pretty accessible at this point. If you have a preferred platform, reach out to us and let us know if we're not on it. We are also on Patreon now. As we heard off the top of the podcast, we just had our first $10 tier donor, which is very exciting.
Mr. Simon Jester.
Yeah, we, you know, the Patreon helps us pay our awesome sound engineer here, Pat.
Hey, Rob, please,
up, Pat?
Mrs. Simon Jester.
I
suppose, yeah.
Oh, well, if it's the original Simon Jester, it's neither, because it's an AI.
Neither. Yeah.
But yeah, and as well as our fantastic artist Danielle, who's been doing our thumbnails. You know,
Danny in the house.
Yeah,
hell yes.
We
Talented
really want to be able to
fuck.
keep this podcast going, paying off the hosting and paying the people who help us make it happen. So please check us out on Patreon. And other than that, you know, thanks for joining us. I'm Drew McCaffrey.
I'm Rob Santos.
I'm Patrick.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye,
Later.
everyone.